Joining us, MS Now senior Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend here on MS Now, Eugene Daniels, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and former GOP strategist Rick Wilson, the director of the Center for Effective Public Management and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Elaine Kamarck, MS Now Justice and intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian, and Punchbowl News co-founder and MS Now political contributor Jake Sherman is also with us. Lots of talkers here. Rick, I want to begin with you. In comparison to Marco Rubio, because that's what everyone is going to do now, how did J.D. Vance do? We're going to get to the substance of a lot of what he said in a moment, but just in terms of the optics and the performance of it, how did he do?
Look, this is the press room primary these guys are now competing in, and I don't think he was quite as slick as Marco was. But he probably made Donald Trump happy today by defending the new $1.8 billion slush fund and going after this narrative idea that these poor people on January 6th who stormed the Capitol and beat police officers were just somehow abused by the Biden administration. So he probably did okay with Trump on this one today. And he certainly was working that sort of MAGA right-wing media frenzy about the people there that were asking crooked questions, et cetera. Yeah, I give it a B minus.
There's a bit of a tortured defense, though, of this compensation fund. Critics will call it a slush fund, and the way that it could be used. This idea, the gaslighting, Jake, on January 6th, the gaslighting about what happened that day, who was accused of what, who was convicted of what, and this implication that some of these guys who were beating up police officers or pepper spraying them, getting violent on the Capitol, were treated unfairly. Even though a lot of this stuff is on tape and it was well supported by evidence and it was prosecuted by career prosecutors within the DOJ, this rewriting of history continues, and he really did a lot of work there on that.
You know, Katie, he basically said some of these people might have been in front of kangaroo courts. That's going to be a difficult argument to make for the and Ken could talk more about this, but the dozens and dozens and dozens of people who were convicted of a variety of crimes on January 6th and the fallout from the riot and the infiltration of this building that we're standing in here. Now, I could tell you this. We've seen something remarkable today here on Capitol Hill where Senate Republicans are just speaking out against this fund and against the creation of it, just the idea of it. And John Thune even said he's not a big fan of it in some other words, but basically said that and said the appropriations process, the process by which Congress funds the federal government for the next year, is going to vet this and see if it wants to fund it. Remember, the government doesn't have money to just throw around for priorities unless Congress says so. I mean, Trump could try and has tried and will, I assume, continue to try. But Congress can say, we're not going to do this. And we're living in a world, Katie, I hate to jump ahead here, but we're living in a world now where there are two incumbent Senate Republicans that the president has now endorsed against, Bill Cassidy, John Cornyn, both of whom are around until the end of this year. And Cornyn, we don't know if he's going to win or lose his primary, but Donald Trump endorsed against John Cornyn today, endorsed Ken Paxton in that Texas Republican primary. Everything is going to get more difficult for Trump to do in this building. It's just going to get more and more difficult, whether it's another reconciliation package, any of his priorities that need money. There are going to be a lot of Republicans now who just are not supportive of Donald Trump and what he wants to do.
Well, that's not, it's shooting himself in his own foot. Ken, let's continue on, though, on the Blanche and the IRS and the fund side of this stuff. So this was a part of a compensation package that was in a settlement. So Donald Trump would drop his $10 billion suit against the IRS. Remember, this is Donald Trump asking the federal government, which he oversees, and a DOJ, which he says he's in charge of, to pay him $10 billion, suing for that. In exchange for dropping that case, they got this $1.776 billion fund for political weaponization. First off, talk to me about the people that could potentially apply for this. The vice president and Todd Blanche have said it's anybody. Anybody can do it if they want. Hunter Biden can do it if they want. Who is the intent? Who is this intended for?
Well, if you listen to Donald Trump over the years, it's intended for people caught up in everything from the Russia investigation to the Jack Smith investigations to the January 6th matter. And just to pivot on what Jake was saying, there is a legitimate criticism of the way the Garland Justice Department approached the January 6th investigation. There were some people within the FBI who said we should not be going after people who just trespassed on the Capitol. Those are misdemeanors. Let's just leave those aside. And they didn't. They went after everybody. And that's the germ of this idea that somehow people were treated unfairly. They threw the resources of the federal government in a way that we haven't seen before. And a lot of people, even some within the FBI, were uneasy about that. But that's not what these folks are arguing now. They're arguing there should be relief for felons, for people who assaulted cops. Trump has already pardoned all those people, and now they are liable to be compensated. And it's not only compensation. This fund and this settlement allows for official apologies by the U.S. government. So it's a real effort not only to compensate these people, to please MAGA, but to rewrite the history, as they've been doing for some time, of January 6th and of these other investigations. And we got to keep saying this. This idea of weaponization is a myth. There is no evidence, they haven't produced any, that you can criticize the decisions to go after Trump and indict him as a policy matter, whether that was a good idea. It certainly empowered Donald Trump. But you cannot suggest that this was anything other than career prosecutors following facts and law, because there's just no evidence to the contrary, Kate.
Well, so it seems like they understand that they might be caught in that. And so the fallback is, well, they were over-sentenced. They were given too much time. It was not fair, the number of years they're being put behind bars. He brought up today Tina Peters in Colorado and her sentence being commuted by Governor Jared Polis as an example, which might be the best version of the case for him. But a lot of these folks, again, Ken, were convicted, and there's videotape of them doing pretty terrible things and saying pretty terrible things about what they intended to do on January 6th.
I mean, I've never seen Republican politicians ever showing any sympathy for people who assaulted police officers. That's what we're talking about here. Except for this. And look, remember, Chris Van Hollen brought up today the case of one of the people pardoned on January 6th who went on to molest children and is now serving life in prison, and actually tried to silence the witnesses in that case by saying, I'm going to be compensated. This is before this fund was ever thought of, but he perceived that he was going to be compensated in some way as a J6er and was offering some of that money to try to silence the witnesses in his case. Some of these people are just awful human beings who've gone on to commit other crimes, and the idea that any of them would be compensated, I think is going to anger more than Democrats and the left. I think a lot of independents, and as Jake said, Republicans are pretty uneasy about it.
Yeah, a party that says that law and order is the most important thing, protect police officers, thin blue line. We also need to make sure that we put all the pedophiles behind bars. We got to get them and make sure that they're being punished. There's a big pedophile ring out there that we're going to uncover and we're going to expose. This is the same party who released a man who assaulted a police officer and then was accused of being a pedophile. So I don't understand how to square that circle. Eugene, let me talk about the politics here regarding the American public. Caitlin Huey Burns of CBS had a good question to J.D. Vance. Why create this fund, this $1.776 billion fund, at the same time that Americans are struggling? And they would like some money to help pay for gas, to help pay for beef, to help pay for their electricity bill, things that have gone up under Donald Trump's tenure, things that Donald Trump promised would go down.
And you're not hearing a great answer on it. His answer on it wasn't great. Right? Like, at the end of the day, what you're hearing from Vice President Vance and the administration is they are trying to, as you said, square a circle, but it's like squaring a trapezoid, because at the end of the day, this all came because Donald Trump sued the IRS for $10 billion. That's the connection here. Right. And so when you have J.D. Vance going out there and saying the president and his family, they're not going to apply for this fund, this has nothing to do with them, that makes it hard for the American people to believe that. And the American people, voters, people who live in this country, they have made very clear to Democrats and Republicans they are willing to try new things. They're willing to vote for people they haven't voted for in the past. They're willing to stay at home. So when you don't do the things you said you're going to do, and when you say you're going to do those things in record time, right? Donald Trump made promises about doing things on day one, but he's trying to tackle those things on day one. And they're looking at the money leaving their pockets, and it's more money than it has been before. And they're able to connect. A lot of our correspondents have been at gas stations talking to people. People are able to make the connection between my gas is up and Donald Trump's war in Iran. And the fact that the administration is not seemingly for these folks working on the economics aspect of what's happening to them is the biggest problem, right? A lot of politics is the view of it, right? It doesn't always matter what's actually happening. It's what people think and feel is happening. Yeah. And at this point, Donald Trump and the administration aren't really making people feel like they're working on their problems at all.